Welcome back to another week of the Launch Sequence podcast. I am your host, Keenan. This is episode 35, I believe, which is quite a bit. Still happy to be here as always. Today with the good friend, fellow content creator, STARJUMP GRIM, part of the group STARJUMP with Ender and Starlet, who all create some cool content for the Star Citizen community, but there's a lot going on there. So I'm going to let you tell everybody what you guys do.
I appreciate it. Well, thanks for having me on. First off, I know we've talked quite a few times, and we talked about getting together. It's just taken a while. I think we're both pretty busy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm STARJUMP GRIM. I'm part of STARJUMP as a whole, and STARJUMP is just sort of like a little consortium of people that, you know, hopefully are doing kind of interesting things, and maybe there'll be more in the future. But right now it consists of myself, Ender, as well as Starlet, and we all kind of handle different things within STARJUMP. There is some overlap, obviously, but for the most part, I handle the STARJUMP like cinematics, which people may know us from, like the Drake and the Aegis cinematic. I handle STARJUMP Station. I kind of put this show together, and then I'm doing all the visuals for our new Fleet Viewer project. Starlet, she handles all the back end for that Fleet Viewer project through her hangar.link site, which is already live at hangar.link. You can go there and do CCU calculator stuff and learn how to save money on your journey to get bigger ships. But the Fleet Viewer will be part of that. And then Ender, who I've been gaming with for, it's probably been 20 years at this point. We've run other communities, content creation communities and other games together. He is working on this series called STARJUMP Chronicles, which is sort of where our cinematics come together with like in-game machinima, and it's a blend of the two to tell more narrative stories. So he's working on that right now, and we're doing our first story, The Data Runner, that we're pretty excited about. And then he also just manages the Discord and the overall community outreach, keeping everyone in line, making sure they're following rules, all the good stuff, because I am terrible at anything social media related.
That is the hard part.
Yeah, and Ender does a lot of streaming too on his Twitch channel, just to kind of keep community engagement going. So it's really all of us, and it may be more people in the future. We always kind of keep an eye out for someone who, people maybe that don't have a home that want to do cool content, but like aren't really going full force into like branding themselves and putting themselves out there as a Star Citizen personality. Those are the type of people that we're like, well, if you're looking for an umbrella, we may be that. The overall goal though with the group though is just to do stuff that's kind of unique and a little different. So
yeah, that's something that you see with actually a few groups in Star Citizen. I think overall content creation is getting so diverse that people are able to create these groups like you're talking about to take on different aspects of it. I mean, you guys, you're doing the cinematics. That's how I found you. I think that's how a lot of people found you, which are incredible, and really nobody else is doing with the modeling that you guys are doing. And then, like you said, also the Fleet Viewer is super big deal. Chronicles, like you said. So this whole idea of bringing in multiple people to take on this team effort, it's pretty cool. I like that, and I like to see it.
Yeah, it splits the production work up a little bit. And then, as me and you have discussed in the past too, it's like some of these projects like cinematics and stuff, they have long lead times. They can be 3, 4, 6 months to make. So you really have to like pull together. If you do want to be a destination for people to enjoy content, you have to have somewhat regular content. So these jobs or these projects have long lead times. You really need something to sort of fill in the interim. And that's where, a couple people coming together to sort of generate content where it's not all on one person can be beneficial. I'm sure as someone pushing out content, it's a lot sometimes to get things out the door.
It can stack up. Yep. Just remembered before we continue any further, anybody who's watching the video podcast, I'm sure you noticed my camera is doing some weird stuff. My Cam link is broken, so I might look a little weird for maybe 1 or 2 episodes, but everybody else who's on audio side, don't worry about it. You guys get the premiere experience. But anyways, let's continue. First, I want to actually take a couple steps back, and I do this with everybody who comes on, but I want to talk to you about how you kind of got started into Star Citizen, what brought you here, and what made you think it was a good idea to start making content for the game.
Well, first off, just a big sci-fi dork, and always have been since I was a little kid. And I went into visual effects for film and television right out, in college. And the reason I went into visual effects were because of movies like Star Wars and stuff like that. I was also a big Star Trek fan, so stuff like that. That's the entire reason I went into that as a career. So naturally, any video games that were space or spaceship related, and even just you know, subtle ways I was interested in. And
Yeah.
I remember I was working at a company and working on my computer. I was working on some film at the time, and I got an alert that Chris Roberts had just was doing some new Kickstarter thing, and that's when I first heard about Star Citizen. I was interested immediately, and I didn't back the game immediately, but I was interested. I was like, "Oh, this sounds really cool. I'm into this. I'm going to follow along." And I have a lot of friends in the game industry, and I went to school for video games for like my first year or two of college.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just interested almost in just the business side of it. You know what I mean? The fact that they're funding this game through the Kickstarter, funding kind of method and all that stuff. So I was interested in it just even from that perspective, and kind of kept following along. And I told myself, after a few years, obviously articles started popping up. Is this game ever going to be finished? It's made 200 million and all this stuff. And I kind of made a mental note to myself. I said, I don't know where the production of this game is going, but I'm going to set some of my own personal kind of milestones that the game has to meet before I will back it. You know what I mean?
Makes sense.
And once it started hitting those milestones and just conversations I had had with people in the games industry, I started to get more and more convinced. That was like, oh, this is really happening. It's really coming together, and this is going to be something pretty groundbreaking. And then I think it was with patch 3.8. So not too long ago, to be totally honest with you, it's only like 2.5 years ago or something. Patch 3.8, I fully committed and backed in a big way and stuff, because that was the patch that they introduced persistence.
Right. Yeah.
So, and that was the big milestone for me. I said, when they hit persistence, to me, I'm willing to invest time into the game at that point. So once they did that, I am, back the game. And I'm the type of person that once I'm interested in something, and I'm like actively playing it, I can't just play it a little bit. I'm like 1,000,000%
go all the way in.
And usually that means I'm playing the game, I'm making a podcast, I'm doing crazy. I'm doing content for it, because I don't play a lot of games. I really only play like 1 or 2 games at any given time. So, Star Citizen is that game for me now, and has been for a few years.
Okay, kind of cool. That's a very natural progression. Well, I'm curious, what were those milestones you mentioned that kind of started to get you more leaning towards, okay, this is going to happen?
It was things like the server, the object container streaming.
Right.
It was stuff like planetary surfaces when that first was sort of announced, because I watched the announcement of that and stuff. I was a little bit dubious, honestly. I was a little bit, I don't know, is this getting crazier and crazier? And then boom, they make it a reality. Things like ArcCorp, for example, was another one. I was like, a planet-sized city. You know what I mean? Like, you start hearing these lofty claims, and you're like, they'll never make that happen. And then, boom, that checkbox gets marked off. But again, the big one was persistence, and 3.8 or maybe 3.81, I forget, introduced persistence. And that was the big one that was like, okay, now the wallet is coming out and starting to put into the game.
Fine.
Yeah. And then I started, again, I have a lot of friends in the video game industry, and just talking more and more with them, people that had either maybe worked for a brief time at CIG as like a contractor and maybe worked on one specific thing or what have you. I started hearing more and more about how, no, this is legit. Like, it's happening. They're investing all, money into a lot of the right places and stuff. Again, doesn't mean that the business is perfectly run, because I've never seen a business in my life that's perfectly run. And I've started 2 businesses myself and they were perfectly run. So, there's going to be some issues with any business, but from what I could gather from people and stuff, things and priorities were being, and R&D were being put into the right areas. So it was enough to convince me.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
That's actually something I don't really get to hear much, is what people who are also in the video game industry but outside of Star Citizen generally say about the project. Because, you go certain places and you'll hear that everybody outside in the industry is laughing at CIG, whereas you go other places and people will be like, oh yeah, they think they're onto something really good. So it's confusing.
Yeah, I have two of my good college friends, still very close with them. One of them is a very senior level person at Bethesda, oversaw Skyrim and stuff like that. And another friend of mine is a pretty senior artist at Rockstar, and both of them are big Star Citizen fans. Now, it's not to say that some of the stuff Star Citizen is trying to do is ambitious, and its final form may not be totally as described. But at some point too, I think you have to step back and believe in a dream sometimes, as cheesy as that sounds, and hope that it can hit that high mark. And if it falls a little bit short, okay, but it still may be an amazing thing, even if it falls a little bit short from that, almost sky high goal. And that's the way I feel about Chris Roberts and a lot of the people that have those visions at CIG, Tony Zarevek and stuff, that are building these backend systems that are kind of without equal in the industry. I believe in that, and I want to try to support that.
Yeah.
Will it be successful? I don't know, but there's a lot of things that have been tried that have failed, but they probably still should have been tried. You know what I mean?
And a lot of those failures end up still being great things. I saw somebody say recently, it was just some offhand comment online, but they said something like, it's crazy that people still look at this as an alpha and they're just okay. I understand where they're coming from, but I'm also like, where else? What else are they going to do? This is something that's happening that's unparalleled in the industry. People just want to see it happen.
And to be fair, and not everyone would know this unless you work in a career field that has very long production times. Someone that works in the film industry and has for a long time. I can't tell you the amount of films I've been involved in that have been in development hell for 6, 7, 8 years sometimes, and it's a movie, which is something that people know how to make.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And seriously, they'll be in development hell for 8 years, and it can be everything from contract issues, R&D issues, financial issues, whatever the case may be. Projects can drag out for years and operate on budgets what CIG's operating on. I mean, I've worked on one large feature film that was very effects driven that people would know if I said the name, and I could tell you that project was 5 years, and its budget was almost, after marketing and stuff too, was in the $350-400 million range. And again, it took 5 years to make that, and it's a movie. People know how to make those. It was no big mystery. You know what I mean? So when you take something like Star Citizen and you say, well, they're doing stuff that's never been done before. They're essentially making two products, right? Star Citizen and Squadron 42, possibly three if you take Theaters of War. And they're a massive, massive company, which is hard to deal with as well. Suddenly the budget, the $400 million budget, and the 8-9 years in development, to me, again, and I'm coming from my unique perspective, to me it doesn't suddenly sound like crazy talk anymore. It's just like, that's about how long it would take. You know what I mean? About how much it would cost.
Yeah.
Again, everyone's opinion is going to be different on that. Though.
Right. Coming from the engineering industry, I've seen many projects go over budget and over time.
Oh yeah,
way too far. So
and projects are mismanaged. I can't tell you. I put it this way, starting off in the feature film world, if I listed out the first 10 companies I worked for in my career, all of them are out of business at this point. Ouch. And it's because companies are hard to run. You know what I mean? Shifting demographics, shifting, target audience tastes. Think about this: when CIG first started making Star Citizen, things like, games like Fortnite hadn't even been thought of. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And in-game events weren't a thing.
Exactly. So not only are you developing a game, but you're developing a game over time that has to still appeal to people's, current tastes and stuff. So, and that's not to say that CIG shouldn't be looked at with an eye sometimes, and certain things criticized and stuff like that. They should be. But I guess what I'm saying is I definitely recognize the challenge and what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, I would love to see it be successful.
Sure.
So if that requires a little bit of investment from me, I'm willing to do that. You know what I mean? And everyone has to kind of set that limit for themselves.
Yeah. That changing demographics and honestly just changing industry overall is probably more relevant than ever now, with such big movements in the game industry, with, you know, things like what Microsoft is doing, what Epic has been doing, Apple. There's a lot of big players in gaming, and now we're seeing you know, CIG going and buying up office space and making some pretty big statements on their own. It is interesting to see how, you know, the industry is going to change, and the development and the path of Star Citizen will probably change to help with that. Starfield coming out this year. I'm sure that's going to have an impact on Star Citizen in some way, whether that's, you know, people taking a little break, looking at this, maybe bringing in new mechanics that hadn't really been thought of in terms of the space exploration gameplay. So that stuff's exciting.
And competition's good too. You know, when things like Elite, you know, announced their Odyssey expansion or whatever that ended up being. And I know there's been some issues with that, some disappointment from the player base. But at the same time, when they did announce it, I was excited because I was like, oh, this could be a nice little kick in the butt for CIG. I mean, everyone needs that every once in a while. You know, but again, when you think about it, you think like, man, when CIG first kickstarted this, you know, there was no Epic Game Store. There, you know what I'm saying? Like the gaming landscape was very different back then. And you're talking about a company now that, you know, a lot of people too will use the, I hear this a lot. I hear people say, well, you know, CIG just wants to keep the game in development. They rake in so much money. And to me, as someone who knows a little bit about back-end services and stuff, to me, that's a little bit funny, because if the goal is to just bring in money, the way they're doing it is the worst way possible, because there's much easier way. So for one thing, for example, and this is why I get so focused on server meshing for CIG's level of detail, if they can truly pull that off, and not with the first iteration of it, but let's go 5 years in the future, right? Thinking long-term business strategy, if they lock down that technology and those systems in place, and they were able to package that up as its own, you know, game engine package, like licensable thing, they'd make way more money doing that type of stuff. And I would have to think that CIG is looking at some of these pillar technologies they're creating in that light. At least I hope they are.
Yeah, I mean,
it gets complicated. I mean, anyone that works in back-end systems knows it's great to create the system for what you're doing, but if you can somehow package that up and market it as its own thing, then that's even better.
Yeah, and I think most people who are watching the Star Citizen development at the level that we are, and are kind of following this stuff, while yes, we're thinking about, you know, this is stuff that needs to be done for Squadron 42 and Star Citizen, obviously they're buying massive office spaces. They're bringing in thousands of employees. Like, this is bigger than just this initial sort of video game aspect we're thinking of, whether that means outsourcing or licensing the engine out to people, or building more games inside of it, whatever it is. It's definitely, this is big tech, and you're right, they should be doing more stuff with it.
Yeah, I mean, I hope they do. I mean, again, I want the game to have a very long lifespan. I want to be playing it in, you know, 5 years and 10 years, hopefully. And, you know, to do that, they need to be a successful company. So I want them to make the business decisions that are required to do that. So, yeah, I mean, I can white knight it a little bit like that, too. But again, it's not to say that there's not things I disagree with that they've done, or maybe certain decisions that they made that I'm like, man, I don't like that. You know what I mean? That's going to happen. So you just kind of you have to sort of look at things long term, I think, with CIG.
Yeah, we tend to talk about that stuff here as well sometimes.
Yeah,
but let's talk more about your own content in particular. Cool. You're doing sort of a group thing, but also very unique in that you're doing these cinematics with ships that honestly nobody has access to. B, you're also building out a fleet viewer. So can you talk a little bit about how I'm guessing those two things are kind of included because you have to build the ships for both. Talk about how you ended up going in that direction. Why did you want to do a fleet viewer?
Well, so the Fleet Viewer came about because after I put out the Drake cinematic originally, that was at I think IAE in 2019, I believe, is when I put that out. And I had like 6 followers on my YouTube channel. I had like none. The reason I did the cinematic, I'll start there, is that that year I sold a house. I made some good decisions, and I said, I'm going to treat myself. So I pledged and got a Kraken. So that was like my big thing, right? And first week or so after I got the Kraken, I was like, oh yeah, I own a Kraken, And then after a few months, I was like, oh wait, I own a Kraken, but I don't have a Kraken. I'm not going to see a Kraken for a long time. So I started thinking, man, I at least want to do something with it just to kind of satiate my,
Right. Yeah.
my Kraken desires. So I did an animated. I took one of CIG's pieces of concept art, and I sort of animated it with the Kraken. I took a Kraken model and I tried to recreate it. And I said, oh, I should just go ahead and like build a whole cinematic for Drake because I was very big into Drake, and that's what that was. So that's sort of how the cinematic started. But then when I released the cinematic, I started having a lot of people request ships from me. They're like, hey, do you have the Kraken model? You have the Corsair models, generally the unreleased ships.
Right.
Do you have this or that or whatever? And they would say, can you render out a still for me? And can you put it in these 3 colors for my org? I want a wallpaper, And that got me to thinking, like, how could I give the community these assets without taking so many specific requests? And it naturally kind of just went into then like Fleet Viewer territory. And I once I got to thinking about it, I was like, you know what, there's no reason without disregarding some hard work obviously to get the ships done, why I couldn't build some sort of Fleet Viewer and get it in people's hands so where they could do their own stuff. And then it was when I started talking with Starlet, she had kind of a vision for how this could be programmed on the back end to be lightweight and, easy to use and all that kind of good stuff. That's how the Fleet Viewer came about. It was more about just getting the stuff into people's hands.
Okay. But it is a need. There's definitely, this is kind of a unique need, I guess, because Star Citizen is the way it is. But there are a lot of people out there who spent money on the game and don't necessarily have like a real representation of what they spent money on. So they're looking for somebody who can help them get the shots they want.
Exactly. And it's a lot of, to me, I look at when people post fleet pics, which I know can some people hate that.
Right.
The reason I've never minded fleet pics per se, especially right now and this era of Star Citizen's life, is that in any other game like Call of Duty or whatever you're playing, you can show your rank, right? Or your gear or whatever you have that you've earned to kind of show your investment in this game, the time investment or the money investment, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Star Citizen, we do not have that in the game right now. Again, nothing's really permanent in the actual verse right now. So the only way to show off any sort of anything is your ships that you own. Yeah. So fleet picks, I think, in a way, sort of are like our gamer rank and like a Call of Duty or something like this at this point. You know what I mean? They're kind of bragging rights for some people. Some people, there are ability to show commitment and all that. So I don't necessarily look at them in a bad way. And one thing I will say about the Fleet Viewer is, when I first put it out there that I was going to put one together, a lot of people immediately like say, "Oh, good, I hate using Starship 42, blank, blank, blank," and I would immediately fire back and say, "Well, Starship 42 and Lunfacy over at Starship 42, he's a big supporter of what we're doing. I'm a big supporter of what he's doing. We've actually shared assets, believe it or not, and." I think there's plenty of room for both because they both won't really do the same thing. You know what I mean? Ours will be high fidelity. For example, ours will be high fidelity, but will be locked to certain angles. But it will be high fidelity. His will be a dynamic camera, but lower fidelity, right?
Right.
Using just hollow models, while ours are fully textured things. Ours will also get some abilities, not in version 1, but in version 2, we're going to add the ability to be able to change the ship's primary and secondary colors to anything you want. We're going to allow you to, for example, if you select an Endeavor, We're going to allow you to place which modules you want on it. We're going other things like that.
Yeah.
So they really are more, I think, us and Starship and any other fleet viewer that comes along. I look at it more as like they complement each other. You know what I mean? Just sort of just depends on how you're trying to visualize something.
Sure. So
yeah.
Is this something that you've thought about long term, like how fleet viewers will fit into the game, fit into what people are doing once all the ships are in game, and kind of how fleet viewers will continue to be an extra use on top of the game after that?
Yeah, and so this has been some conversations that me and Starlet specifically have had. And while I can't say what the plan specifically is,
Sure.
because it's something she thought up, and I'm not sure if she's totally ready to announce it yet. What I can say about it is I have heard of what she wants to do with sort of the fleet viewer assets and then a larger platform. And in terms of how to use those assets going forward into the game, once like a lot of these ships are in the game and there maybe isn't a real need for fleet viewers. And I can tell you that the idea is really, really cool. I can probably say that it's would be an app that you would have like on your phone or on your computer or maybe on a tablet, and it would have some like direct in-game usage. Beyond that, I'll let her announce it when time is right, but I can say that there's definitely some forward thinking going on there. And this particular idea from hers that I can't really talk about too much is one of the reasons that when I first started talking to her, I was like, man, I need to get you in StarJump because this idea is too cool. And who knows if it'll ultimately end up coming to fruition, but I know she's got a lot of really, really cool ideas for the future.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I think I'm always thinking about, because the way that this game, it's really exciting. The way that my thinking of this game changes is always based on like how many new people are coming into the game. Back in like 2018, 2019, the community felt small. It felt like the handful of tools that we had, everybody knew about, everybody used. But now, jump 2-3 years later, 4 years later, and the community feels very expanded. There are a bunch of people making content and like all this stuff is happening. So I just wonder 3-4 years from now, how are these fleet viewers going to be viewed and what are people going to be doing with them? It's exciting stuff.
Yeah, and I think what our goal is to, and I don't know if it'll necessarily be the fleet viewer at that point. It'll probably just be using some fleet viewer assets, because by this point, I imagine the fleet viewer would be in like version 3 or something. But what we would like to do is create tools that allow people to ultimately play the game in more organized groups and especially think large ships, like how do you crew and organize a crew and assign crew all that kind of stuff. How do you do that? I'm hopeful CIG puts in the ability to do that. But for example, wouldn't it be cool to have like a tool offline that allows you to start building organization and assignments for maybe some big fleet sortie you and your org are going to do that weekend, but maybe during the week through an app or a web browser type platform, you can start doing a lot of that pre-planning with your other org mates or something. I think stuff like that.
Yeah, that's definitely something we've talked about in our org.
Yeah. So, and a lot of that maybe is a little hard to envision now, but, imagine when you're rolling into Nyx with, a Kraken, a Polaris, and 10 small fighters, and what figuring out who's bringing the fuel, who's bringing the medical supplies, who's bringing this, who's bringing that. That kind of organization and logistics gameplay, I think, will need third-party tools, in my opinion, to be doable.
Yeah, especially with a game like this.
Yeah, a lot of that comes from me and Ender's game time in Arma 3, which we had our own milsim unit, and we ran a lot of custom mods, and it was very logistics heavy. If our unit was doing an op one night, let's say the actual operation would have a 2-hour playtime. We might spend 2 hours just loading up trucks and vehicles and backpacks and doing all the logistics planning, briefings to the unit and stuff. I mean, the logistics sometimes on those things can get pretty heavy. So yeah.
Well, it's good to know that it's not just Star Citizen, because that
no,
it was like, I want to fly across system. Give me a couple hours. So let me prepare myself.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to hear now about your upcoming cinematic. So you've done one for Drake. You did the big one last year, which thank you for including my organization's logo in there.
Happy to do it. Yeah.
And have done a few more. I know there was the Aegis one, and then was there a promo for RSI yet?
There was a teaser for Crusader.
Okay.
Because I was going to go head first into Crusader cinematic, and then I hit pause on that for a few technical reasons. And partly that had to do with the Hercules series of spaceships, because out of all the spaceships, it's so funny. Sometimes people ask me, like, what are the hardest ships to deal with? It's not always the ones you think of. The Hercules is really, really difficult, and I don't know why it is. Both the in-game models, the holo models, they're all difficult to work with. So I paused the Crusader one and went right into Aegis, because I already had a lot of the Aegis ships done, and I was like, I can make this happen. That ended up turning into something bigger than I thought it was going to be. I ended up doing, like, I think 65 ships for that cinematic. Jeez. And it was too long. The cinematic was like 9.5 minutes. And when I look at, an engagement on it, people really fall off about that 4-minute mark. So the next cinematic, which is going to be RSI, I'm going to keep it around that 3.5, 4-minute mark, and I'm going to keep it a lot more focused. There's a lot of pre-production work going into things now to build out things to a higher level of detail. Some of the shots are going to be done in Unreal Engine, so they're requiring a slightly different pipeline. There's going to be planetary surfaces this time. There's going to be a whole prolonged battle sequence with Titan suits. And Titan suits are something that don't just like exist. Like, I can't just like go grab those from the holo model store. You know what I mean? So those things have to be modeled and rigged and developed and textured and worked on and all that stuff. And so it's going to be a shorter cinematic, but it's going to have, much like the other ones, it's going to contain ships you've never seen, Titan suits, which no one's ever seen, and include new locations, a lot more planetary surfaces, which I have not done, in the past. So the goals are still the same. The goals are still to like show off things that people have not really seen yet, hopefully. And then obviously the focus will be RSI, so you can expect to see the Polaris. Bengal will be in there. There may be there may even be like some larger capital ships than the Bengal. We'll see. There's a lot of people will comment about in the Aegis cinematic, I show 2 Perseuses get destroyed. Yeah, you can bet that the Perseus will get its revenge. And the RSI cinematic. So yeah, I'm excited about it. In pre-production, kind of getting things built out, scenes are planned, and I'll probably start animating on like February 1st is when I'll probably start animating. Yeah,
that is pretty cool. Why is
shooting for
sorry?
Shooting for like an Invictus release for that.
Okay, that would be around. I think that was around the same time you did the Aegis one, right?
It's like May. So it's been a year. So this will have been a year, but I purposefully took time off from doing a cinematic for IAE this past year because I wanted to focus on the Fleet Viewer.
And you guys also just started STARJUMP Station this past fall, right? Or was that the summer?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I think it was in November, maybe in October. I forget. STARJUMP Station. That's myself, Ender, and Starlet. And we just wanted to do a topic-based discussion show that included visuals, which was something that is done, but not done in the way we wanted to do it before. Usually people show either gameplay footage or will show like references from CIG videos, around the verse and stuff. And I wanted to do a video. Yeah, and I wanted to do something. And here's the thing. The reason we didn't want to just do that was because we think there's people that already do that really, really well. And we didn't think that we could bring anything new to the conversation. So one area we thought we might, could distinguish ourselves a little bit was maybe doing some visuals that are tied a little bit more uniquely into that topic point. So, last week we just did a episode on capital ships, and we were able to show visuals of every capital ship, even ones that aren't, even remotely in game yet, like the Orion and the Merchantman and Hull-E and stuff like that. And, it's been cool. It's been a lot of fun. It gives us a chance to like kind of just talk about Star Citizen, which, as I told you before we started recording this, that I really love to do. Sometimes the topics are ship related, sometimes it's gameplay related, or whatever. But we're having a lot of fun with it. It's supposed to be. We kind of have two types of episodes. We have deep dive episodes, which are like the episodes we did on the Endeavor. And those are heavily researched. We take a few weeks to build visuals for them. And then we have episodes that are a little bit more off the cuff and just a little bit more casual, where we don't prep a lot of stuff. That'll be like our tonight episode. So it just kind of alternates, depends on what type of episode it's going to be that week. But okay. We definitely get more traction on our episodes that are pre-planned and are very specific on the topic. I've noticed that.
Yeah, the topics of these shows definitely drives the traffic. I mean, you could have one good topic and then talk for 50 minutes about completely other stuff, and then that topic will definitely drive the engagement.
Yeah, and I'm having to get better at titling the videos.
Yeah,
I was really bad in the beginning of just titling them very boringly, a fun discussion, quote unquote. And we have to learn now that I've learned now that like titling the topic something very specific or whatever can get you to kind of like get eyes on it a little better, or a good thumbnail image or whatever. So learning those things, but it's been growing pretty steadily. And when we do the live stream of it now, we're getting a good chunk of listeners, and people have been, great community people out there have been rating us and supporting us. So it's been really awesome. And we're trying to kind of pay that forward with other people that are doing content. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. How'd you guys, so you talked about raids. You guys are doing your streams on Twitch?
Yeah. So we do the on Twitch, and that's every Friday nights at 10 p.m. Eastern. Mm-hmm. However, I don't know if it'll always stay on Twitch. We actually have way more subscribers and stuff on YouTube, and it's very possible we'll switch to YouTube because our community really started it on YouTube, and that's where we have the most of our subscribers. That's where the cinematics and all that are pushed to. So, to be honest with you, I can see it soon, maybe even switching to a YouTube live stream thing.
That's what I ended up doing. Same idea, started on YouTube where most of the community is, so wanted to do that.
Same exact reason for us. Yeah, it's a lot of that community, and I totally understand it because I was never like a Twitch person at all before StarJump. A lot of our YouTube community, they like to remain in that, in that area. They don't want to go to Twitch and watch the live streams there. They actually would prefer to just upload the VODs, to YouTube, which is totally understandable. So I think going forward here in the short term, one of my big goals is to serve that community a little better and start doing some stuff straight to YouTube. I'm actually next week starting a new show I forgot to tell you about. And that's probably going to be, I'm thinking that might be a YouTube exclusive. I haven't quite decided yet, but it's called StarJump Skunk Works. And it's going to be something I started doing on my behind the scenes streams was I would show myself working on like fleet viewerships, but then towards the end of the stream, I would let people in chat ask any questions or if they wanted to see something. So if they're like, hey, can you show what can a Hurricane fit in a Polaris hangar? And I would bring up those models and actually do it live for them. And then just recently I had someone come in and say, hey, could you take the Kraken, rip all the flight decks off of it, fill it up with size 8 guns, and essentially turn it into this massive capital gunship. So we did it live on stream and I rendered it out. So it was like a high fidelity render of a kit bash. And the response was so good for it. I was like, you know what? I'm going to do a show that when we get on, everyone in chat can take a vote on what they want to see me do on the fly. And it can be a kit bash. It could be a wholly brand new ship. It can be, we'll create a Drake refinery ship or whatever. And we'll just do it live on the stream. And so that's going to be my new show, probably starting next week. And that might be on YouTube only.
Okay. That's pretty cool. I like shows like that. I'm trying to kind of work out a similar model where I basically go on stream and make a YouTube video with everybody. I like those kinds of things though, where you sort of take community in and then let them go crazy with it, because you end up getting some weird stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and that's really what I'm figuring out now is how to put some guardrails on it, because I obviously have to have certain parts and pieces prepped. So maybe it's like the week before I take submissions, on ideas or whatever. So we'll see. Still in the planning phases of it, but kind of excited to do it because it gets people excited. And again, it's another way that they can kind of be like directly involved. If that makes sense.
Another show, man. I don't know how you do so much of this with another job. I'm going crazy and I'm doing it for full time. That's
oof. I'm lucky too that my job is predominantly working with 3D and visual effects, so it allows me to like cross over a little bit. Easier than say if I was like working construction, out on the road somewhere. I wouldn't have that ability
really apply that
to bleed out. Yeah, so I'm pretty fortunate right now with my day job. So
that's good. That's cool.
Yep.
Well, let's shift gears and let's talk about the year ahead and what kind of good stuff is coming up. We've touched a little bit. We talked a little bit about like some of the big things that are coming, like server meshing. Gen 12 rendering is big. Quantum is big. How about some of the smaller things, like the really specifics? One thing that comes to mind is like resource management. It's like one of those things that's sort of in the back, but very important. You have anything that's like really standing out to you that you're looking forward to this year? That are, nothing confirmed, but that's possible.
I mean, the funny thing for me is probably something like, I guess the gameplay feature that I've been most excited for, and I guess for some people it would be a big thing. For me, it's, when you talk about server meshing and stuff, this is probably much less important than that, but it's things like the cargo refactor. I definitely love hauling cargo in the game, and and like I said before, I'm a big logistics person, and I think with the cargo refactor, which is by its nature going to bring in this like physical loading and unloading of ships, and not only specifically related to cargo, but how that in the future will affect everything from loading your medical supplies for your journey, your suits of armor, your friends' suits of armor. You load up, for example, let's take a Carrack, for example. Let's say you're going to load a Carrack up and you're going to go into Magnus and do some exploring, in the future, prepping for that journey. So having that persistent hangars, which we know we're getting in 317, hopefully, persistent hangars with the cargo refactor system, which allows us to, actually load and unload ships, and how that will downstream into things like loading, supplies into an Ursa rover, and then loading the Ursa rover into your ship, and then you're loading all your buddies' gear and loading your, everyone else's gear. Yeah, all that stuff. I'm really excited about. I love logistics gameplay, and I know a lot of people don't like that because it can slow down the action, but I really enjoy it. So for me, the cargo the personal inventory was, I think, like 0.1, tier 0.1 of that. The cargo refactor to me is like, the good, like, tier 1 level of that sort of back-end game system. It will only grow from there. So yeah, I would probably say cargo refactor, but not necessarily just for like cargo. I'm interested in it for its entire impact on the game going forward.
Yeah, it's kind of like how, like you said, the inventory system. It's not just because we get an inventory. It's like now we get to plan out what we're carrying and everything. Cargo refactor is a good one. You said that a lot of people are not about slowing down the gameplay. They have problems with the idea that they're going to have to physically load things. Do you think that's going to end up leading to a lot of people leaving the game?
I hope not. I am concerned the more and more of those systems that do come online, I do think there'll be some loss of the player base, but I do think that we'll gain other players. My only point of reference from this is a game like Arma 3. Arma 3 is, if you play it vanilla, right, and you play it straight out of the box, and you can easily just get people to join, right? They'll join your session right through Steam or whatever, or through the Arma 3 launcher. Easy. You add 1 or 2 mods, suddenly you get a couple less players, but the game's more interesting, right? It's a lot more logistics heavy. Then you get into the level where a lot of the milsim units play Arma 3 and like mine and Ender's unit, where you have almost 50 gigs of custom mods running.
Jeez.
And they affect everything from medical systems to logistics systems. And right away, when all those mods come online, the technical footprint for the game and the learning curve becomes so steep that two things happen. One, whenever a new person would join your unit, you actually had to send them to training to learn how to use all the subsystems, right? Because now it was no longer now just press G to throw a grenade. You know what I mean? Now G brings up a whole context menu. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then the other thing was some people just do not have that time investment anymore, right? And you would see your 30-person Arma Knights dwindle down to maybe 4 or 5 people. And it's something that all Arma 3 milsim units really battled against was player retention and getting new players, getting them past that learning curve. And the parallel there with Star Citizen is that the mods we were all using, a lot of those milsim groups in Arma 3 were using, were things like Ace 3 Medical, logistics mods, things that allowed you to carry boxes, carry cargo crates, medical mods that allowed you to inject drugs, inspect bodies. Well, in Star Citizen's world, CIG are building those directly into the game. They're not going to be mods. But while they're building them directly into the game, that doesn't necessarily make the learning curve any easier, right?
Yeah.
Now a new player, they just, if they're playing Star Citizen, they need to learn how Star Citizen's medical system works. What are all the different medicines used for? And we're talking tier 0 systems right now. How, do I have the ability to drag a player? I didn't know I can put my gun in a gun locker in a spaceship. In the future, when we're not allowed to even wear like our heavy armor suits when piloting a spaceship, I got to take my armor off and put that in a locker. Again, the more and more that this happens, the more and more a new player has to learn. And it's going to be a little bit on CIG's shoulders, obviously, to build a good new player experience.
Right.
But I do worry that no new player experience is going to fully prep someone for all the in and outs of Star Citizen. And it's going to really come down to orgs providing some sort of like training period for new recruits.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That can actually be a fun gameplay loop in and of itself. But I think it will be a challenge. I think as the game slows down more, you're going to see some drop off. But then you're going to gain some players too. You're going to gain those people that do love that slow logistical gameplay. And maybe they haven't signed on to Star Citizen yet because they're already scratching that itch over an Eve or an Arma or whatever game they're playing.
Yeah. And I think the big thing that the people who think about leaving or think they aren't going to enjoy the game anymore because of the cargo refactor kind of miss is that while you said CIG need to be there to help people learn this kind of stuff. They have a player interaction experience update on the release view for this year, which should help with that kind of stuff. But also, they have to continue to do what they did with medical, which is like, hit the C key to heal yourself, which is simple and easy to pick up, or go get a medical tool, learn all of this, and get good at this. If you want to learn more, they gotta continue to like hit that sort of beginner's version, expert's version. But then there's also the aspect of all these things that they have going on in the game in this economy. They kind of have to depend on the fact that some people aren't going to like the cargo stuff, right? They have to make it so that those people are like, well, I don't like this, so I'm going to get, my friends who do like it to help me with it. And that creates that group gameplay. So I really do hope that those people, when they think about these things that might come to the game that they don't like, whether that's fire hazards or power management or ship burnout and stuff like that, I hope they do think about that more in terms of like, I just need to find a way around that as opposed to I should just leave now. Yeah,
it's partially the reason, and we talked a little bit about this on our capital ship discussion and in regards to capital ships, but it really applies to all levels of ships. This is one of the primary reasons why I would prefer CIG, and I don't know if they necessarily think of it this way. As a matter of fact, there's some clues that they don't. I almost would prefer them look at certain levels of ships as certain levels of investment in gameplay for the player, right? And what I mean by that is like let's take what you're just talking about, like fire propagation in a ship, right? Let's say if a fire breaks out in a room, we know let's take a large ship. We'll use the Carrack as an example again. In a ship like the Carrack, you may have a fire going on in a room that you now have to send people to put out the fire.
Yeah.
But you also may now need an engineer that can reroute power through the power relay system that we saw CIG show off a couple years ago. They may need to reroute power in real time. Because if you look at the repair document CIG put out years ago, pulling out a burned component requires the power to be off or you could be electrocuted, okay? Now your ship is dead in the water and possibly a combat zone. So now you need some people to be on turrets for defense. That is a whole level of gameplay. I almost look at that as like if you're playing an MMO or like an RPG MMO, it's almost like doing a raid, right?
Yeah.
You have a lot of people all focused on a singular goal. And the singular goal in this aspect is not beating the end boss, it's operating a monster ship. Where on the flip side, flying an arrow, at least how it's sort of looking, doesn't have near the investment, mainly because there are no hallways and rooms and corridors that a fire needs to happen in. If your arrow's on fire, you probably need to eject.
It's on your lap.
Yeah, it's on your lap. You probably do have a power relay system. You definitely have physicalized components, but they're not even readily accessible because they're on the exterior of the ship. So right away, you've removed a lot of like gameplay depth, right? But just by being in a single seat fighter. And I love to look at the ships like that. So I love to, like, if you're like, well, I like some of that component gameplay and some of that repair gameplay, but I don't want it to be crazy. Well, then maybe you should be in like a Cutlass Black, right? Level ship, size ship.
Yeah.
So I love that the ships could almost be tiers of gameplay. And I do see CIG mention it like that sometimes. But I hope that is ultimately how they go about plugging in more systems into these ships.
Right.
That way, if you have the players that do want that full, heavy, logistic, slow experience, then being a crew member on a Javelin or an Idris or a Kraken is probably going to be very appealing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There may be entire nights where you're just sitting at the repair console doing nothing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Those are the boring ones. That's the one you have the Netflix open on the other screen.
Right. But some people may love that, you know?
Yeah, no, that's there for some people if they want it. And that they got to be super careful with that too, because I agree. Like I want the ship that you get to determine the amount of gameplay you can get into, but also making sure, like you said, to say, hey, you know what, getting this big ship is not just a pro. This also comes with a lot of problems. Kick people in the butt for the thought process that getting a bigger and more expensive ship suddenly means that the game's going to be better. You know, people need to understand that you got to have the ship for the thing, which leads me to the conclusion that I really feel like they should keep pumping out ships that are a little bigger, but maybe not as functionally advanced.
Yeah, I really do think we've seen the end of the monster ships, to be totally honest with you. We actually talked about this on our Capital Ship show as well. I think we're done with seeing, or at least for the foreseeable future, I personally think we're done seeing the Kraken, Idris, Javelin level ships. I think the Merchantman and the Endeavor will probably be the last ships to be like that in terms of that regime. I think all new concepts are going to be slightly smaller. I think the new capital from CIG is going to be things like the Odyssey, the Liberator, stuff like that. That have even if you look at, I guess, large ships like the Perseus coming in with much lower crew counts. I see that being the way forward. I think I see some of that, being because of like server meshing and some of those challenges. I know some people have said, eventually they'll release another Javelin $3,000 ship. I really don't think so. As a matter of fact, if anything, I think they probably regret a little bit having to deal with something like the Javelin. But I think if John Crew is to be believed, and if there's someone who I think does generally choose his words pretty carefully at CIG, it is probably John Crew. He said just as recently as 2 Invictuses ago, he said on the Ship Talk that running a capital ship will be a burden on an org. Not just from cost standpoint, but just from general operation standpoint. And all we can do is take him at his word at this point. But I believe that, again, when you take all the systems they talk about and dream of those all operational on a ship, it's going to be a massive headache. But even going back, don't even factor in things like costs to like fuel the ship and all that. Think about what we were talking about earlier, cargo refactor. Think about loading. Let's take a Kraken. Let's think about loading and prepping a Kraken for a mission. Oof. Let's say if you get together with your org on a Monday and you're like, okay, on Friday night, we're all getting together. We're assembling these 7 ships. We're going to fly out as our fleet, and we're going to head to this system. But in the meantime, I need to get the 20 of you that are going to be on board the Kraken with me. You've now got to put your own suits of armor in there. We need to load it up with food, extra fuel storage, extra components. Remember, because CIG's talked about, one of the things on large and capital ships is you're going to want to probably bring extra components and storage to replace broken ones. Yeah. All that stuff. I mean, how long is it going to take to load these monsters? Yeah. You're going to be a pain in the butt. Again, you're talking about an entire gameplay loop, the logistical gameplay loop, and a lot of players aren't going to want to sign up for that. They're going to want to be, you know what, I want to get in my Ares Inferno and I want to go wreck something. And there's nothing wrong with that. But hopefully, it goes back to this whole idea of I look at capital ships as raids. Now, the only thing is that you're not fighting an emboss. The successful operation of the ship is your reward for the raid. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like you want to go on a science expedition. And a lot of people are like, hey, we're going to do this cool space exploration. How is Star System going to have enough space to explore? There's only going to be so many jump gates. And you say, well, it's not about the jump gates. You're finding resources. You're not just flying straight to a place, finding some asteroids and then flying back. You're going out there, you're doing your long distance scanning, you're making sure the ship's running, you're staying away from pirates. Like there's going to be so much more granular stuff built into these ships like you're talking about.
Absolutely. I mean, I was just reading the Star System monthly report that was put out yesterday, and one of the things they talk about with jump points is that they are currently working on the
abnormal exits.
The abnormal exits, thank you. And we've talked about that, or CIG's talked about that in the past when they showed the original jump point to Pyro demo. They talked about how, what happens if you're thrown out mid-jump. And one of the things Chris Roberts, I think, had mentioned was that he expects the ship to be heavily damaged when it's thrown out.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you got to prep for that. You know what I mean? And you, especially if you're flying a capital, because it's not like you can just send out a Vulcan to get you on your way. A capital is going to require capital level repair and refuel services and all that. So again, when all those systems come online, I think the bigger ships are going to be a massive headache to operate. And require a lot of front end labor to operate. I just think your reward at the end is going to be a unique game experience that you can never get anywhere. So that's what people are going to be chasing, is that high of, that unique game reward of the multi-crewing this massive monster.
Unmatched experience.
Yeah, it's an unmatched thing. So for me, and I talk about this with some of the people I play with all the time, I could easily see during the week or maybe 2 or 3 weeks out of the month, you're doing a lot of your Cutlass Black, your Ares Infernos, your type flying around, your freelancers. And then, that 1 weekend a month, your org's getting together and breaking out some of the big boys. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's how I ultimately think it's going to work.
Yeah. I have that opinion too. And I hope it goes smoothly because there's a lot of stuff they're going to have to balance.
I think one of the primary things is going to be better org tools, entire org tools to help set org permissions, role permissions, org money coffers. That you can set permission levels for people to access those money holdings. We're going to need a more robust org management system in game.
Yeah.
Before that stuff, in my opinion, becomes a reality.
Definitely.
Operating those monsters,
I figured we would have seen more org tools by now, at least for the ability to, see your org in game, see their party markers, anything like that. But I don't know where it is. I hope they talk about it soon.
I would love to get an update on that.
Yeah. I would say at the end of all of this, though, what we've just been talking about these last 10 minutes or so, with the way that these bigger ships are going to become kind of a burden to run, as you said, a lot of people are going to start to feel, I think, some regret about some of the ships they've bought, because we've got people who they want to experience that gameplay. But like you said, if you own the ship, you got to crew it, you got to get all the money to run it, you got to get the time to run it, all that stuff. I think a lot of people who, maybe have gotten a Perseus and a Polaris and I don't know, something else that's kind of in that same class are going to start to think, well, maybe I don't need these ships. And I'm wondering what's going to happen then.
I think there could be some regret with some people for sure. One thing I would like to see is, and there's a subset of people too that feel like, oh, I'll just NPC blade my ship out, and we're not exactly even clear on how that will work. I think it's pretty easy to see how that would work in combat scenarios. It's easy to see how AI would man a turret.
Yeah.
But it's much less clear on like how that would work if you're operating in Orion doing like heavy mining.
Or like some deep space probes.
Yeah. So I would love more, knowledge on that. But I think it's going to be a burden. I think one of the things CIG needs to do to alleviate that, and they have talked a little bit about this very briefly in the past about how they want this to be a thing, but they really need to allow us to give essentially the keys to friends and party members or org mates to fly our ships wholly independently, spawn them. And I think there needs to be org hangars. And I think there needs to be, with the org management system at some point, there needs to be some sort of system in place where that org leaders can build out, where, let's say, the more ships you lend to the org hangar, or even if you are lending a capital size ship to an org hangar, you get, a few org credits that month or whatever it is to kind of reward that putting back in to the org. You get kind of org rewards for that. Maybe it's slightly cheaper org repair costs, or whatever that is. They need to build those in because they need to give people a reason that have these large fleets to utilize them, because if those fleets are just sitting in your hangar, that you're gonna have people get buyer's remorse.
Oh yeah, there are way more ships than need to be, and most setting up player-to-player ship rentals is going to be super important to making sure that is not a big holdback on the game, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also finding a way just to buy them back for people to sell these ships in game, I think would be good. But I don't know. That's getting into currency. That's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, if they allowed you to sell any ship you had in game for credits, which doesn't really hurt CIG much because they still have their money from the original war bond purchase. Yeah. But sell that ship for credits that you can then put into other money sinks in game, whether it's, for example, buying, raw materials for an outpost you're building, or
insurance,
or what have you. Yeah, that type of stuff. Yeah. Or if players, I'd really love the ability for players to be able to rent their ships to other people.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a player rentable system with fees and, like being able to put a deposit down on it or whatever it is. It'd be cool because, for example, if I'm not using my Kraken and, when I bought the Kraken, if my ideal org, if I was originally going, oh, my org is going to be 200 people. Well, if by the time the Kraken is out, if my org is only 8 people at that point, I could definitely see myself wanting to rent the Kraken out full time.
Yeah.
I mean? And generate revenue off of that. That could be really cool.
Yeah. Nobody else is going to be using it.
Yeah. So.
Well, STARJUMP GRIM, my friend, thank you so much for coming to the show.
Yeah, it was a blast.
We hit the 1 hour mark. We could probably keep going for a couple more, but I'll let you go. We can have another show, another time to meet up. I would like, though, to finish us off here, just let people know, where they can find you. We've talked quite a bit about it, but give them the official links. We'll have everything linked down in the show notes for everybody, but anything else you wanted to say before we signed off?
Just that, go check out the YouTube channel. We have our cinematics there, and all the STARJUMP stations go there. And then if you're really interested in Fleet Viewer, it is progressing. We're on target with it. Working very hard to get it out this quarter. if you are kind of more interested in more like regular updates on it, though, I do behind the scenes work on it a lot of times on Twitch. So you can follow me over at, StarJump_GRIM on Twitch. And I'm constantly doing behind the scenes on there. I pull up ships by request. But just keep track of us on those 2 locations and join our Discord if you want to be a part of that conversation.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, finally, thanks again for coming and being a guest here. And my own little plugs, of course, as always, please visit our website. That's where really all of the stuff is happening. We've recently started bringing more activity onto the blog. I am trying to publish all of my scripts there, and we're looking to bring on some guest writers for opinion pieces. But generally, the website is great if you want to see the latest videos, the latest giveaways, and all of that. Also, consider checking us out on Patreon. Patreon supporters do make this podcast free for everybody else, no ads, and generally just help me make a living and support my family. So I'll always plug the Patreon. That's down below. Thanks for everybody who supports, including the supporters who are here listening live. And thank everybody else just for coming and listening to this service on all of our audio formats, Apple, Amazon, Google, wherever that is, and also watching on YouTube. We'll see you guys again next week for another good show about Star Citizen and gaming in general. And have a good weekend.